All right. Hey, everyone. So I heard a couple of you talking about some students and one of our faculty went to Panama over the break, and I heard about that like during the break. I was like, how did they get to go?
Yeah, they didn't go sailing.
So it was like I guess a student trip or something. So
It was, yeah.
I have some things to consider because I wish I had maybe pursued that option instead. I didn't realize that was an option. Okay. Anyhow, I'll be thinking about that and seeing if I can do something in the fall for anybody around. I'll probably talk with him about that as well. I have a quick announcement here. I'm hosting a colleague from France, and so he's a kind of wastewater membrane sort of guy, and he also deals with a lot of systems connected to sort of developing situations in Africa. So they often host people there from Burkina Faso. So he's going to be visiting this week, starting tomorrow. He's giving a seminar on Friday, and so I'd like to invite you all to be there. And if you do come, I'm going to give you up to 2 points credit to your total participation score, kind of as a bonus. Give him a better audience. This is in Patrick Taylor Hall 2113. That's the Germano room. Not going to boost anybody's participation score over 100. I don't know if that'll matter or not, but so I do plan to do that, so please consider coming. Got his abstract here. Essentially what he's working on is anaerobic membrane bioreactor. So anaerobic treatment we often consider, so a typical membrane bioreactor, we have activated sludge, bubbling oxygen, letting microbes consume stuff, and then we pair that with filtration instead of sedimentation so that we get a kind of a more compact system. Well, he's doing energy recovery with an anaerobic membrane bioreactor. You had a question?
Is there like a specific attire, or can we just show up?
No, you can just show up. It's fine. It's just a seminar, so.
I didn't know if it was like professional.
I mean, you.
Or not. So
That's
why I
the.
don't want to show up like in my leggings.
It's an interesting question, right? What is a dress code for academic settings, right? It's generally pretty loose, especially for undergraduate students. But it's also a decent opportunity to develop professional habits. No one's going to look at you funny for dressing up a little, right? So feel free. But no expectations there aside from being appropriate or whatever. Okay, so that's an opportunity for you. I think it'll be quite interesting. I'm looking forward to him spending time here. Okay, so with that, I want to talk a fair bit more about, well, today really spend basically all of our time today talking about the technical writing. I think every single one of you plagiarized. And I'm just mostly saying that for the shock value to see your faces. I'm actually mean that technically, but am I going to get you in trouble for all that? Well, let me just take you through real quick the expectations from the English department for anybody who has plagiarized. Here's the policies and procedures. So if I suspect that there's plagiarism, this is what for the English department they're recommending to do. So go to this website, submit all these forms, including include the essay, include the assignment, include the syllabus, written summary, explanation of the alleged violation, yada yada yada. Okay, so that's a lot of work to do for every single one of you, right? And I'm kind of being playful about this because I'm not concerned that you plagiarize, but I'm telling you that you have so that you can learn exactly what plagiarism is. So let's read it from LSU's Code of Conduct. The lack of appropriate citation or the acknowledged inclusion of someone else's words, structure, ideas, or data. Failure to identify a source. Goes on a bit about this. So as you think about technical writing, you're giving me this report on some topic, you're learning from what you're reading, and you're learning from class, and you're kind of formulating your own thoughts and ideas into a coherent paper, making some sort of argument. A lot of the feedback I gave you on the thesis statements was, I want you to come up with some sort of an opinion you can assert, some sort of argument, some claim that this technology may be a good solution, or this situation, we're not taking the right approach, or this organization has not taken the right approach. Make some sort of a claim, right? That claim is your thought. That claim does not need a citation because that's you formulating ideas and expressing your ideas to me. But it's built on the facts of the matter, right? You've done investigation, you've figured out how many people have died of this disease or that disease, and that it's a problem. All of those facts that you're pulling together, even if it's from class, I've been working from a few textbooks. Those textbooks have taken data from the WHO or some other source. So when you could think about citing me or the classroom, the lecture, that's maybe okay, but what would be better is to actually go to see what source I used and to say, oh, well, it's this textbook. Oh, and then you look at the textbook, that's from the 1999 World Health Organization study. So you cite that, not me, not the textbook. That's the best thing to cite, because it's that data that you're using to make your claim. So we'll go through a couple of examples here in a minute from years past, but the point being here is that if you've made some sort of factual statement, then, and not provided a source, I'm so sorry, I thought I had this back up at the PowerPoint. There we go. Okay, so that's what I was referring to, the lack of appropriate citation or the unacknowledged inclusion of someone else's words, structure, or ideas. So if you make some sort of a statement like there are X millions of people that lack access to sanitation, maybe you heard that from class, maybe you kind of think that, or maybe you even make it more broad. You say there are millions of people. You just say millions of people worldwide. Well, that's a factual claim. And unless you did that study and you collected the data, then technically you're plagiarizing somebody, right? So I'm being very particular about this because that is the definition of plagiarism, right? So just as you're thinking about writing technically, it's going to be a good habit to really say, okay, well, what is a factual claim? Because you didn't study and count how many people have diarrhea, or whatever the claim you're making is, right? Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, does it really matter? I didn't mean to. Like, I wasn't copying somebody else's essay. And sorry, this is just a placeholder. Don't bother with that. But technically, again, according to LSU's definition, strictly speaking, it's not a question of intent. It doesn't matter if you meant to or not. It's still plagiarism, right? It's not that you wanted to cheat on your assignment to get a grade or to save time. In fact, you were just submitting a draft to me, which is why I don't really care in actuality, why I wouldn't at all bother pursuing anything. I'm just telling you what you've done if that was your final report, right? I think at the start, and even expressing give me this draft, here's what I expect, you ought to try to include your citations, but it's not a big deal. The thing is, it's a draft, right? So I'm showing you that it would be a big problem if you submitted that. Essentially what your claim is that you did that data. You collected that data, or somehow that's coming from you, which in some cases is obviously not true. Okay, so anyway, a little bit about plagiarism to scare you, so to speak. Some of you did a great job, and there's like few or no places where I marked like reference. So maybe there's a couple of you that I wouldn't actually technically call plagiarized. Yeah.
I think at one point in my life, I've been told that like, if you have two sentences in a row that are from the same source, and then you just cite it at the end of the second sentence, like that's okay. Mm-hmm. But I think you marked that it wasn't okay on mine. So are you saying just like, even if it is two sentences in a row from the same source, cite both sentences? Yeah,
that's an excellent question and point, and I've heard the same thing myself. So essentially, in case you didn't hear that online, if you have two sentences in a row and you put the citation, both are making factual claims. Thank you. And you place the citation at the end of the second sentence. I believe that's technically okay. When I'm going through at least this initial draft, what I'm doing is like, hey, there was a factual claim without any. So then I go ahead and mark and say that, and then I keep reading. I'm like, oh, well, it's probably okay, but
Yeah.
so if you have any doubt, or if you were citing maybe two different facts or something, or maybe there's a second paper that you could add in that was also relevant or something, it might make sense just for the flow, but I think that's technically okay,
Okay.
to write two sentences and have the citation out.
Okay, and then another follow-up question. The what is it? Environmental Science Journal. What is it called? Environmental and Technology Science Journal.
Yeah, environmental science and technology, the
That-
formatting? Yeah.
Yes, the formatting. We don't need to use additional footnotes to cite like page numbers or anything, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, well, typically, so if you take a look at different formatting category or different you could look at the APA, you could look at the ESNT journal, you could look at some other journal. There's all sorts of journals with their own formatting. But typically what you'll have is if it's referencing a journal article, within the reference text in the bibliography, it should say the page numbers for that article within the journal that it's in, right? And so that should just be in the,
That's enough.
that's enough.
Okay, cool.
If it's a book or something or some different source, the formatting might change a little bit. If you're using EndNote or something similar, it should have fields that'll tell you about it, and it'll build that into like the actual citation at the bottom. So if you're using some large book or volume, and you actually have two different citations from within it, one from some page and one from another page, you might actually enter that citation in twice. It'll be like A and B or something with the different page numbers, but I personally probably wouldn't even bother with that myself. So
Okay.
just would probably keep it at the book.
At the book, okay.
Yeah.
Noted.
Any other questions? Does the plagiarism thing make sense now? Okay. And I'm not actually like about to report anybody, right? Now, if you give me a full paper with like, it's pretty clear that it's maybe not even your own writing, and I look it up, and yeah, sure enough, there's like a whole bunch of matches with other places. Yeah, that would be a problem. So if I see there's a lot of intent, otherwise, what I'm here to do is coach you to proper technical writing. Okay, a few examples here, kind of, in some ways answering what we just talked about. I pulled a couple examples through here from last time I taught the class, anonymized student writing, and then a bit from my own writing that I'm kind of working with a student on right now. So this one here, we have a sentence, however, the lack of management for industrial, agricultural, and sewage waste that comes with such growth has become a prominent area of concern for both human and ecological health security in this region. So I'm saying that needs a citation because I don't think the person writing this has done that study his or herself. So I think that this would need some sort of citation here to make that claim, and possibly even to make two claims. So there's a lack of this stuff. So that lack probably ought to have some sort of citation, or the fact that such growth brings with it that lack, right? That's one statement of fact in there. And then the second would be that that situation has become a prominent area of concern, specifically for ecological health and human health. So then maybe one citation at the end of the sentence could incorporate both, but I would say it may even make sense if you have a separate article to cite here as well as at the end to show that first fact, here's where it comes from, and then that second fact. And keep in mind, your goal here is to make it easy for somebody else to make good use and good sense of your work, right? Your writing, you're trying to convey something, and when we're doing technical writing, you want to make it easy for your reader to figure out where you got your information and go access that. So if you're making some sort of argument, maybe they're looking to make a similar argument on a different topic. It's going to be a lot more useful to them if you've clearly marked, here's where this idea came from, or this data set, and here's where this other one came from. So that's good practice. So here's the first couple sentences of this paper I'm working on. I've been working with my former grad student to revise it. Access to clean and safe drinking water is a critical challenge for people around the world, especially those who live in rural areas. So we've got 2 citations there. And then photocatalytic technologies may become a solution, and we've got some grammar issues that I need to go back over here, may become a solution for sustainable, maybe, something like that, a sustainable solution, something to that effect. So clearly I need to go back over it. Water, yeah, and you see I've just been working on rearranging, it's just all that. In some situations, if certain hurdles can be overcome. But the point I'm trying to make is those citations there are, we have 4 citations in 2 sentences because I'm making quite a few claims. So there's access to water is a critical challenge. So I could have one source to the access and one source to the challenge part, or maybe two that are both on that topic generally. And then the photocatalytic technologies may work if certain hurdles can be overcome. Right, so there's a couple things there. Again, if these are kind of distinct points, what I would do is separate them to be may become a solution, that's one source, and then the hurdles that are in the way would be another one. When you don't need a citation is, again, when you're making your own argument. So if I were to follow this and say, photocatalysis is therefore lame. Just use a little therefore. That's my opinion that I'm interjecting in there, right? That's not really the point of the article there, but that would be an opinion. Or I could say, is the best thing ever since sliced bread. And that would also be an opinion, and I don't need anything like that. Now this article, we have some data, so eventually once we get on to discussing the data, there are claims as well, factual, or maybe we suspect this is the reason. That's actually our data, our ideas going into it. And you can do the same thing with your writing, and I'm hoping that's one of the depth of discussion categories, is for you to take the ideas, the data from other resources and synthesize them, integrate that knowledge into your own opinions or statements or ideas. Okay, so kind of answering the question earlier, or elaborating it a bit. If you're taking a sentence and making sort of a general statement that sort of leads to some other relevant statements that are more specific in fact, and you're going to cite those, sometimes that's a good way to do exactly what you were saying, is you have a couple sentences in a row, maybe at the start of a paragraph, you say something that really you're referencing a lot of work, but you don't, it just feels weird to put like 10 references at the very first sentence that's very general, right? That kind of thing is pretty well understood, so long as you are conscious of the fact that these references are following. It makes coherent logical sense that it's coming behind. So several recent studies aim to better understand the inhibitory mechanism of dissolved organic matter on photocatalytic systems. That's a statement of fact, and I said several studies, right? If I was reviewing this as if it was your work, I would immediately probably highlight this little bit and say, okay, reference, but then in the next sentence, I see in 2015, Brame et al., this study, experimentally validated, blah, 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 blah. So, and that's referenced. So it's immediately clear that I am immediately launching into reference study. So maybe if I didn't catch that and I said, where's your reference? And then your reference is like clearly right there, no problem, right? Just ignore what I said. Question?
In a reference like that, do you still need to put the number even if you're...
Yeah, so if you have typically, if you have provided in line here the author and date, I think it depends a little bit on the citation format. If you're using an author date format, maybe you don't. I tend to think it's good practice. So if this sentence went on and ended here, I have a little marker there at the end of the sentence, just to make sure that it's very clear, and that's citing this author. Maybe it's not necessary. Most journals, I think, will ask you to go ahead and do that. Maybe with the exception of if you're doing, instead of the numeral here, if you're just doing, it would just look like this anyway at the end of the sentence. By the way, if you want to do it author date style or APA or whatever, that's fine. I don't mind so long as you're getting your punctuation correct. And when I say punctuation correct, if you have like, there's a few ways. If you're doing like a bracketed number, some will do this where you have a sentence and then you have the brackets there, the not superscript. That would go before the punctuation mark. Or it might be like 3,10 for those two references. If you're doing like the superscript, the proper way to do that would be your sentence, the punctuation mark, and then the superscripted number. Author date would be like this, right? So the author and date, and a period after the parentheses. So long as you get that stuff correct, I'm happy. Yeah.
If you do 2 in a superscript, is it a comma? Like 3, like?
Yeah, so that would be 3 and 8. You could even have like 10 through 12 all in there. And if you're using EndNote or something like that, it should do all that automatically. So it shouldn't be too much of a concern aside from where are you putting it with reference to the punctuation mark. Yeah.
I think there's like on the description of how we should be writing this, it says like you need to use the things such as EndNote.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't work for your computer, is it okay to just kind of, put it in like manually? Was that it?
Yeah, so if EndNote's not working on your computer, you are welcome to do it manually. I just suggest that you explore other options, or maybe get with LSU's IT to see to get some help troubleshooting it, because I do think it's really well worth it, especially for grad students, to make use of something like that. There are other ones. In fact, I think on the one of the things about plagiarism even gives some suggestions on where to go. Probably on one of the other pages, but there are other open source free things to use as well that can do it. I remember actually back in high school, I found a website, probably through my school's library or something, that you could enter it in and then it would do the formatting for you or something. I don't remember what it was called, but it was a long time ago. So things have been around that can help you with that. It wasn't quite as fancy as EndNote for sure, but it could at least format the things at the end for you. So make use of something. I do suggest trying to get it work or something else. Mendeley is one of them. Bibliotech, I think, is another. Okay. All right, so let's see. I think this was just another example where I thought a reference ought to be given. We've got landfill leachate in this particular region, and other cities in Mexico are facing, and we need a citation there. So when in doubt, go ahead and cite. Especially, and again, I'm thinking kind of along the terms of having a note working and everything. Then it becomes really easy to cite and add the references. And once you get it formatted, it shouldn't be too hard one way or the other. So I would just recommend cite often. The nice thing about using a condensed format, something like this or the numeral here, is it's not too clunky. It's not like it's getting in the way. If you're using author date, maybe you want to be a little thoughtful about it, because sometimes if you do like 5 papers, that's lots of authors, and can almost detract from the writing itself. All right, any other questions on references, citations? We'll come back to that if we like. Okay, so I mentioned on a lot of your papers passive voice, or maybe I just wrote PV just for short. What I'm calling your attention to is that you've used passive voice, and it struck me as taking away from your writing. It's not necessarily incorrect, so some of you may have learned, and this is from Grammarly here, talking about active voice. You may have learned that passive voice is weak and incorrect. It certainly can be weak, or is generally a weak way to express an idea or something, and we'll explain that in a moment. But it's not necessarily incorrect. When used correctly and in moderation, passive voice is fine. Okay, so a couple of examples, and we'll build towards, okay, what exactly is passive voice versus active voice, and why does it matter? So active voice means that a sentence has a subject that acts upon its verb. Okay, so and typically that means like you've got a subject, a verb, and some object that is ultimately, the key there. So if we have a subject acting on the verb, that would be like a monkey adores bananas, or monkeys adore bananas, right? So we've got the subject, the action, and some object. And really, the main thing is the subject of the sentence and the verb itself. Okay, a couple more examples. The cashier counted the money, the dog chased the squirrel. Now, you can rearrange each of these into passive voice, and you'll see here, if I say bananas are adored by monkeys, so just pause a moment and listen, okay? Bananas are adored by monkeys. Monkeys adore bananas. Which one is more punchy? Which one's more which one's stronger? Which one conveys the meaning simpler? The squirrel was chased by the dog. The dog chased the squirrel. Right, you can start maybe if you look at sentences like this, and if you start looking at your own, especially if you have a longer sentence, right? Especially if you have the squirrel that was acting squirrely. Let's say you just add that onto there. The dog chased the squirrel that was acting squirrely. Or the squirrel that was acting squirrely was chased by the dog. Which one's more clear? Which one takes more thought energy to interpret? Now, when I say it out loud, maybe it's not so bad, but if you're anything like me, reading, I'm not somebody who reads super fast. I'm sort of methodical. I end up pausing a lot to make sure I know what the meanings are or whatever. I'm not somebody that just scans through writing, and so when I hit something like a passive voice thing with a lot of extra clauses, maybe they're entirely relevant and useful, but if there's lots of clauses, essentially you can accidentally confuse the reader about what you're actually talking about, what subject is actually present here. So bananas feels like the subject because it's coming first, are adored by monkeys, but actually, so this passive voice, we say a sentence in the passive voice, on the other hand, when the subject is acted on by the verb. So this is the subject, and the adored is acting on it, rather than the subject acting on the verb, right? So it's being acted on by, so you always have like by or something like that, by the monkeys, by the cashier, whatever it is. Okay, the passive voice is always constructed with a conjugated form to be, plus the verb. So are here is a form of to be. You could say the money was going to be counted by the cashier. Would be another way to phrase that, different tense, but it's still passive voice. That to be was counted, was chased, was going to be chased. Is it essentially the same voice there? Okay. usually generates a preposition there as well. That's by the dog, by the cashier, by monkey. So you're having a preposition there, that phrase, and that's not necessary if you're using an active voice, right? You can see these very clear transitions here. Adding the extra preposition there might be stylistically nice on occasion to mix things up, but it's certainly not helping with clarity usually. Occasionally you do want to switch the focus. Occasionally it's that process, that the fact that something is acting on your subject, that's what you want to emphasize. That could be the case if you're talking about some method. Gold miners using illicit methods, something along those lines. Maybe that makes sense to emphasize the method itself acting on a subject. But typically, the active voice is going to force you to think a little more clearly about what you're really trying to say and say it with more specificity. Okay, so let's play around with it. So if the subject is a word or phrase that controls the verb in the clause, and I brought in object here. So object would be the entity that is acted upon by the subject. If we look back, so monkey is the subject. We've got a door being the verb. That would make the bananas the object. So that's being acted upon by the subject. Now, in passive voice, if bananas are the subject and adored is the verb, but the subject is also the one being acted on, I think that would technically be the object as well. And actually, I'm doubting myself there because I'm not truly a grammar whiz. I'm just pretending here. So you can see, though, even just the confusion right here. It's very clear in the active voice, and I'm actually not sure whether the bananas are the object. According to this, it says the subject is acted on by the verb. Yeah, so maybe the monkeys are the object, but in some way it also feels like bananas are both the subject and the object. Okay, so anyway, if we have students plagiarize and paper as the things, we could create some sort of sentence, right? So help me out, and we can include a not there if you like. Let's form an active sentence. Go.
The students do not plagiarize in their papers.
Okay, the students do not plagiarize their papers. I simplified a tiny bit. Okay, so now let's take that and make it a passive voice. There you go. So the papers were not plagiarized by the students. Okay, so you see what you just did there, you got it exactly right. That were, so if you're using that any form of to be, right, and this was a different form of it, but essentially to be plagiarized, were not plagiarized. That's the thing. And the papers, essentially what you do is you swap the subject and object here, and then the papers are receiving the plagiarism rather than the students doing the plagiarizing to the papers. We see now the papers, it cycles backwards. And so you see, and at least in English, the other languages are certainly going to be different and varied in these types of mechanics, if you have them at all. It's calling you backwards, right? And that's not very helpful if you're trying to explain something very difficult. So another thing about technical writing is our goal here is to make it easier for somebody to read because it's already hard, right? It's technical in nature. It's by definition going to be a difficult read. So we're doing whatever we can to simplify that and make it more direct. And so if the students were really the important part of this sentence, that really what mattered, maybe it's the people dying of diarrhea, right? You really probably want that at the beginning of the sentence so that people know what's important and what you're actually talking about. And so that's one of my pet peeves in reading. Technical writing that's using passive voice is a lot of times what's really important is left off till the very end, and I'm trying to get through this really heavy subject to the sentence, and it's presumably an important one, and I don't even know what it's talking about until the very end of the sentence, right? And that makes you spend a lot more time going through it, and it can be a little bit frustrating just to spend the time to understand what it's trying to convey. So that's, if I write PV, consider, maybe I would just notice it and wrote PV. That doesn't mean you have to fix it, but consider working to revise it. And one thing you'll notice is your sentence will probably become clearer by doing so. Especially, again, if you have more information within the sentence. Their research papers for such and such a class, right? If you add in their research papers for their environmental technology in developing countries, or some, our own class title, which is not that, add that into the mix and see how that causes the sentence, right? Okay, so here's another example. I think I showed this a minute ago that needed a reference. It also is a passive voice, has a passive voice issue. So the state's capital city, also named Oyakaya? What was it? Oaxaca. Has recently shined a light on the state's garbage disposal issues and has established more environmentally responsible practices. Okay, so if we could potentially take this and say the capital city has recently shined a light on that has recently, it feels to me like that's probably passive voice. So let's think about that. So has recently shined. So we could say the issues shine or shined or whatever, shine a light, which by the way is a bit of an idiom, probably good to avoid that. Talk about that in a couple minutes. On actually, let's see. The sentence may not quite be coherent here because it's the city is shining a light on the garbage disposal issues. I'm not sure what the meaning there is. Maybe it's the some issues within the city are revealing the issue. If that was the case, we could rewrite it that way. Maybe it's actually fine this way. Maybe that's the way it has to be. So the capital city shined a light on that. Yeah, so maybe that's not the best example, but I think it can be clearer if we were to work on that. And here's part of what I mean by what exactly are you trying to say. So when this sentence is reading the state's capital city shined a light on the garbage disposal issues, I'm not quite sure what the shining the light is functionally. Did they make announcements? Did they do a public critique? Did they do a legal battle? Like what is that shining a light really meaning? And I guess perhaps their point is that it has reestablished more environmentally responsible practices. So you could write this as the city reestablished those practices, comma, shining a light on. So then it's these practices perhaps that were the really important part of the sentence, those new sustainable practices, really what you wanted to talk about, you could put that up front. And then the rest of the sentence can fall into place. Maybe this is not the best example because it seems like there's some reason maybe it can be left that way. But worth considering and worth taking the time to really think about what you're trying to say. A lot of my critiques are aimed at helping you develop your own thought processes, how to express your ideas. Right? That's a big goal with all of the technical writing. Okay, so here's another pet peeve. I think I mentioned this some time ago, but when I was in 10th grade, I had an English teacher who was quite brutal, particularly on grading papers with regards to undefined pronoun antecedents. Sounds like some grammar nonsense, right? When I say undefined pronoun antecedents. What that means is, what does the pronoun refer to? An antecedent meaning coming before. What is coming before it? Right? What is it? You've come across it a lot in writing or in talking. I've been using it. I've been using this. I've been using that. Pronouns, right? When I'm speaking, a lot of times it's easier. I just did it. It is easier. This kind of the colloquialisms to understand what I'm referring back to, because I can structure my sentences with different emphasis. I can refer back. I can wave my hands and whatever. When you're writing, you have to keep in mind that this is technical writing. You might have a reader who stops in the middle of the sentence, gets distracted, has to take his dog out, and then comes back to your paper to start grading, right? It's not good to assume that it is clear. Even within a sentence where you just had a clear thing in the previous sentence, occasionally maybe that's okay. If it's really clear and there's only one thing it could mean from that previous sentence, what's best is to just redefine it or to remind the reader this problem rather than just starting a sentence with this. And that's what I think I got 2 points off of a paper every time I started a sentence that said this is blah. And the correction there is this error is blah, or whatever, right? This something, this situation, this concept. That will help the reader connect, okay? So that's defining this as a pronoun. So whenever I say undefined, or what is it, or something like that on your work, what I'm calling back to is the fact that you had a sentence previously, you're talking about something, probably multiple things, and then you start a new sentence with this, and I have no idea what this is. I could guess, but why are you making me guess? Especially in technical writing, when you have to be very clear about what you're trying to say. You must be clear in order to technically convey knowledge. So if, I think this is, here we have an example, so these here. So let's take a look. The majority of contaminants seen are organophosphates and organochlorine. These are known to cause many health effects. So these, this particular case, maybe it's okay. Because they said the majority of contaminants seen are these two, and then following with these. So this one is kind of borderline, but you still could just easily insert these compounds. And then I know that you're referring to the two compounds that were named rather than the majority of contaminants that are seen, right? So these could be referring to this or to this. And so by just simply stating some specifying adjective there, these compounds, or these, I guess a noun, you can circumvent that whole problem and make your writing clear, make it easier for your reader to digest the information. Okay, so that's the situation there. I remember I had a classmate who got I think I had two classmates that got a 2 on that paper those many years ago, 2 out of 100. And one of them just stood up, put his paper in the trash can and walked out of the room. It's amusing. But we all learned a lot and didn't make that mistake so much. There were other mistakes we were making, of course. Okay, so I mentioned idioms and was kind of mentioned shining a light on. This is a bit of a gray area. I probably marked on a couple of your papers, try not to use that, avoid doing that, or avoid doing whatever. In some sense, because idioms are rather informal. They're a casual use of language. So shining a light on something, it is something we use a lot when we're talking about learning or revealing something. So maybe in scientific talk, technical writing, maybe shining a light on an issue, perhaps that makes sense and that's fine. But if you're using excessive amounts of idioms that are essentially, by definition, you can't put the words together individually and understand the meaning. Like, did I really take a flashlight and shine it on the thing? But that makes no sense, right? So shining a light on a situation is an idiom because you're not able to deduce the meaning from the individual words. And part of the reason to keep technical writing relatively free from that is because our audiences, we're aiming to have a very wide audience base. Maybe you're writing a report that may be translated for use in a developing country or something. We don't want idioms in there because the translation may have an issue, or perhaps somebody who knows a little bit of English is making some sense of it, piecing it together. It's just going to be clearer if you can avoid it in most circumstances. Again, a gray area because it's not technically wrong. It's just something to consider, especially if you're using something. I'll categorize this a bit with informal remarks. So informal things, contractions I mentioned to a few of you. That's a bad example. It's with an apostrophe is probably an okay one, but if you write don't or can't, just write do not or cannot, right? Write it out. Don't use the contractions, they're too informal. If you're using some sort of idiom that's really not technical and really just very, very informal. Shining a light doesn't sound to me too informal, but might be good to avoid. Something else, I can imagine, I think I commented on a few of yours, it's very informal, right? It's not obvious what it would mean outside of being familiar with, intimately familiar with that type of language and that use. All right, so I have a few other kind of subtopics to touch on, not topics that I really saw a whole lot of issue, but just they are recurring. Some people, I think probably everybody could use a bit of a review, and we'll go ahead and just bring up these pages as well. So, proper use of participles. So a participle phrase, something like glazed with barbecue sauce, comma, that's a participle. It's not a whole thought, it's just part of a thought. And essentially what we're talking about is, coming from that website there, talking about is some part of a phrase or part of a sentence, you're starting it, and maybe it's a good way to introduce a topic. If you have a participle phrase like that, you need a comma, okay? So the pattern would be participle phrase, comma, then your main clause. So as you're writing and you see yourself putting in this phrase at the start of a sentence that's not really the sentence itself, it's just giving some context or something, then it goes on to say the rack of ribs lay nestled, blah, blah, blah. Of course, it's talking about food. It's lunchtime. Just keep in mind that's a case where you need the comma, right? If it's necessary to the sentence, then it would not be a participle participle phrase, and it would not need the comma. So more resources here. if you need them for that. And it's just making some notes, not really going to go through that. Okay, another one would be conjunctive adverbs. So another one that we see a fair bit. If you have however, or nonetheless, or similarly, still, meanwhile, depending on how you're using them. So these are, probably not an exhaustive list, but a list here of these conjunctive adverbs. Essentially, these are going to join two main clauses. So you can join them with a comma and, right? You could, instead of doing that, the semicolon conjunctive, you could do a main clause, comma, and blah, 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 or but, blah, blah, blah. And remember, if you have two main clauses like that, you have to have the comma before the conjunction there. In the case of the conjunctive adverb, sometimes you could maybe start a sentence with them. I guess that's not conjunctive then. So this is just the case where you're joining two clauses. So what you're going to want to do is have a semicolon. So you've ended the main clause. You could, instead of a semicolon, do comma, but, or whatever, but then it gets a little annoying to say, but, comma, however, comma, that doesn't make so much sense, right? But still, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of just awkward and probably incorrect grammatically. So you can use that semicolon, that conjunctive adverb, and then go on to your next phrase. So that would make sense if you have two clauses that you could perhaps have two different sentences, but it really makes sense to have them in one stream of thought. This is the case sometimes. However, here's an exception, right? That would be a conjunctive situation. Okay, kind of one of the last ones before I get to a quick poll and to see kind of if you guys are interested in some more specific feedback. Because of and due to. Two very common phrases you end up using a lot, especially if you are trying to convey something caused something else, or explaining the reason that something is the way it is. In technical writing, that's going to be fairly common. So how do you distinguish between when one is correct and when the other is correct? Well, really, it comes down to the fact that one of these phrases, due to, actually acts as an adjective. I got that right. And because of is an adverb. So it limits what they're allowed to modify. The rule of thumb here is if you can substitute due to with caused by, then it's okay. Then you should use due to. If you cannot, it does not make sense, we'll see an example in a moment, then it should actually be because of. Okay, and again, there's a nice website there. All of these websites, by the way, are as resources listed on your Moodle page. I still have not been able to get access to the ACS style guide like I used to have, so I apologize about that. I'll take another look to see if I can find it. Okay, so you see here a couple of examples. My low grade was due to lack of study. And the substitution check is my low grade was caused by lack of study. Makes sense, that's okay. So you don't even have to think too hard about the adverb, adjective situation if you use that rule of thumb. Whereas if you say, I missed class due to the rain, and you're wondering if that's correct, you check and you say, I missed class caused by the rain. Does not make sense, right? Missed class caused by, no. Maybe the missed class was caused by the rain, but then that changed the sentence, right? So I missed class because of the rain, then is correct. Okay. Any questions on any of that? I'm not a grammar expert, but my mother is, and so that helps a little bit. She teaches English as an adjunct professor at college in North Georgia. So I tried to do her some justice in helping with these things. Okay, so I want to get your feedback real quick about whether or not this was useful, and if you'd like to spend the remaining few minutes working on either just kind of looking over your own work, if you'd want to do that as like volunteer your own work as an example that we can look at and I'll critique publicly, or maybe let's avoid that and not do that, you know. I just want to kind of see how you feel about it, and if you'd like, we've got 15 minutes or so by the end of this. Happy to spend a few minutes kind of looking through a few of things more on sort of a one-on-one thing, if you'd like. Next time we'll get into septic systems. We'll do septic tanks, septic systems, engineered wetlands. Did you enjoy Monday's lecture, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah. Aaron's great. I enjoyed that.
I like to just point that like the line between developed and undeveloped is just kind of made up.
Yeah, and it's an economic
Yeah.
term, right? That's definitely something I should mention kind of at the start of this class. So
I
I was
mean,
glad to have
you
this.
like essentially say it. It was just like cool to hear him say that.
Yeah, he had a lot of good perspectives and points like that. And as the class was starting, he was like, do they know the F diagram? And I was like, what's the F diagram? It was like
Yeah.
something I should really know and should definitely be in the class. And I'm like, oh, right, I've seen that. But it's kind of fun for me to see that and to kind of have a second perspective on it all. Okay, so let's do this real quick. So first, was this helpful, or would a nap have been more helpful? Again, you are welcome to answer honestly, but there's a wrong answer here. No. Okay. I actually would be amused if that's your opinion, and would actually like to know that if that was your opinion. And maybe some of you are grammar whizzes and have no problem, but okay. Awesome. Good to know. None of you got the answer right, but you know, it'll only count a little against you. No, okay. All right. Second question. We've got 15 minutes. Would you like me to use your draft as an example? Live critique. I can pull up my research article and correct the thing I found during class, and kind of show you where I'm at with the paper, stuff like that. I could pull up my slides. I haven't really prepped them properly, but we could start on the septic systems, or it's been going for about an hour. We could just say it's really nice and sunny outside. I meant to include an option here for maybe it's the next question. Okay, so we see. Okay, well maybe we've got a couple volunteers, but I think at least half the class is kind of ready to move on. So maybe, but actually a lot of people also interested in that. So what I'll probably do, rather than just excuse you immediately, is take a moment, pull up my paper, and show you kind of where I'm at, where the text I pulled was from, so you have a scope of kind of the process live. Let anybody leave, and then maybe spend a minute or two live critique or one-on-one sort of thing. And answer true if also you're kind of interested in having more one-on-one at another time. We could maybe set aside some time outside of class or something if that's, if everybody wants that. Okay, so that seems to be pretty popular. I'll be thinking about trying to set that up. It might be after the second draft, but for the moment, I'm going to spend 5 minutes or less. I'll pull up my that draft I was talking about, show you real briefly where I'm at with that and what that looks like kind of at the big picture level, and then I'll let you go, and if there's some specific feedback any of you want, I can work on that real quick. So, be just a moment. So this is a paper. We essentially have collected the data pretty much and have just been working on doing some revisions. So kind of big picture, we are planning to submit this to somewhere like the Environmental Science and Technology or something like that. Got a collaborator on there. So I've been working on the intro, and you see the intro that I highlighted and really needs some more attention was the very first words of the paper. So very important that I get that right before we move on. But essentially the intro, we're trying to motivate the study, just talking about the basic premise of dissolved organic matter, fouling the photocatalysts, you saw from the thing earlier. So this is going into some of the history of what's been reported in the past in that regard, what kind of interactions we expect and why. And then we're talking about, okay, well, we have some unknowns, and so we're trying to introduce what don't we know about this type of situation. Well, how exactly are these other things in water, the pH, the different ions that we expect in real water, how exactly is that going to affect our dissolved organic matter interacting with the thing? Because when it interacts, we actually don't like that because we'd rather it be only interacting with the pharmaceuticals or whatever we're trying to destroy, target the enemies. And so the next step, I highlighted it for myself to come back to here, is to work on kind of improving the clarity. Here right now it says, despite the vital insights from studies on TiO2 inhibition by different molecules or DOM fractions, it is still unclear what pretreatment steps would optimize photocatalytic performance in complex matrices. Quite a mouthful, and I'm going to try to simplify that a little bit, say kind of the same thing, and that's sort of where I'm at right now, is thinking about maybe should I rephrase that, can we tweak that, maybe expand a little bit to introduce another concept here. But this paragraph is going to be really important for my paper because it's going to say, we just talked about these things, and therefore here's what we're going to do. Here's the paper that we did. So then we talk about the materials and methods we used, skim through that. We've got some characterization of the materials. And then we get into results and discussions. And essentially we're trying to, we've got comments back and forth. And essentially, in this section, we're taking the data that we have and putting it in the context of other researchers and sort of trying to express what we learned new here and why we believe that's the case. So that's sort of the rest of it until we get to the conclusions where we're really going to, which we haven't written yet, we're going to kind of draw all those ideas together and say, well, this is the most important part that we learned, blah, blah, blah. And we haven't written that yet because we have not really collected all the ideas together and confirmed what we're actually saying with it all. Okay, so with that, if you'd like to head out, feel free. If you'd like to come up for some quasi one-on-one, like, hey, I had a question about this writing thing, feel free. And have a good weekend. I'll see you Friday, I hope, at the seminar.
On my laptop, it's probably just I didn't know what I was doing.